This is Chapter 3, Part 1. What we're going to do is go over the process costing, and we're going to do a report that shows us how to allocate total production costs. This is part of your homework. Now, first we'll go through process costing and how it contrasts with job order costing, which we covered in Chapter 2. All right, when we use process operations, we're looking at mass production of similar items. They have a sequential process. A good example might be, they make Pepsi-Cola. They make the soda itself, and then they have another process, which is the bottling, and then they might have another process, and that's what we're talking about here. So we standardize the process for making large volume of similar products. Each process is a separate production department. Each process applies direct labor, overhead, and direct materials to move it through the line. And the final process in the series is finished goods, or what can happen, example would be, is in this example below, we would take and add peanuts, chocolate, and dried fruit to the roasting department along with direct labor and overhead. And then when we finish that process, or some of it, we then transfer it to the next department. And then when it gets to that department, it shows up as materials. We'll probably add more materials, more labor, more overhead. And then when we finish it, we would pass it on to the finished goods inventory, which is right here. Now, what does it look like, the differences? Well, when we compare, we cover job order costing. And what we do is, like for instance, if we made very unique cars, we would put a certain type of car in a job order number. We would add all the materials directly and overhead. And when we finish that particular job, it would go directly to finished goods, and then the cost would go to cost of goods sold when it's sold. That's the difference between the processing system, because in this case, instead, we have all the same product, but we're modifying it as it goes through the process. Now, in order for us to allocate the total production cost between ending WIP and units completed and transferred out, we have to take 4 steps. And the method we're going to use is called the weighted average. There's also the FIFO method, but you don't have to know that. But if you want to look at it, you can. So the 4 steps are: we determine the physical flow of units. That's part 1 of the report. Then we're going to compute the equivalent units of production. Then we're going to compute the cost per equivalent unit. And then we're going to assign and reconcile the costs. So we'll start with step 1. In step 1, what we want to do is we want to first find out what the beginning working process is, and then the units started this period, and then we're going to get a total units to account for, and then we're going to take the units completed and transferred out and the ending working process, and those two totals always should be the same. Now let's go to our problem, which we have, and we're going to identify what do we need for step 1. Well, we need the beginning WIP, the units started this period, units completed and transferred out, and the ending WIP. Now, this is what the reports look like. And again, these two totals have to equal, but this is the information we're going to use for step 2. Step 2, we're going to compute equivalent units of production. So, what we have to do is take our direct materials and our conversion, and we have to determine how many units would be associated with those based on percentage complete. Well, since we're using weighted average, remember we only use the ending work in process percentages. So in this case, we assume materials are added at the beginning of the process, so they would be 100% for equivalent units of production, but for our conversion, in this example, it's only 25%. So we're going to take 25% times the units to get 5,000. Now let's look at our problem. For our problem, what we need, again, is the ending WIP percentages for direct materials and conversion costs. We do not care about the beginning. We only use those when we're doing FIFO, and we're not doing that in this class. So now we're going to go back to our problem, and we've done step 2. We've taken our units completed and transferred out times 100%, and that gives us equivalent units for production, and also 100% for conversion. Now, ending WIP. Since materials are added at the beginning, the 180,000 units, we're going to take 100% of those, but for conversion costs, we're going to take the 180 times the 30%. And this information is what we're going to be used for step 3 to compute cost per equivalent unit. Now here's the last part of this is step 3. So for step 3, now we're going to look at equivalent units of production. So what we're going to do is take our total cost for direct materials divided by the equivalent units for direct materials, and we're going to do the same for conversion. So remember, these costs for direct materials and conversion have to equal our total cost of production. That should be your tie-in figure when you're checking to make sure you did it right. So what information do we need? We need the beginning, WIP, and cost added information, because we need our total costs of $6,033,000. So we take our costs of beginning WIP, our costs added during the process, and we now total the raw materials and conversion separately, but we have our total cost of $6,033,000, which is correct. Now we're going to divide by the equivalent units that we got from step 2. And that's going to give us our cost per equivalent unit of production for raw materials and conversion. So remember, what we're trying to do is allocate that $6,033,000. Now, step 4 is we're now going to allocate our total cost between completed and transferred out and ending work in process. So what do we need? Actually, the only thing we need is that $6,033,000, because that's what we should total in the end. So first, we're going to determine completed and transferred out, and that's going to be $700,000 for direct materials and for conversion, and we get that from that line up there in step 2. Now for ending inventory, we're going to get that from step 2 also, and it's going to be the 180 and the 54 times the cost per equivalent unit of production. Now we have the information we need. This amount is going to be transferred to the next process, or if that is the last process, it will go to finished goods. And then the balance will remain in work in process. And if you notice, our total is $6,033,000. Make sure you always check that. Now again, this is what the report looks like, and you can see that in your textbook. And that concludes part 1 for chapter 3. And there's one other part which shows you how to do the journal entries and how to apply overhead.